Welcome to the meaty part of the curve, 30 minutes of fundamentals, tech, teaching, and talk. We're your hosts, Jeremy Bond and
Kendra Brown.
We'll be here weekly, hosting a webisode featuring special guests, surprises, and straight talk about the day's instructional challenges. Of course, Kendra's ditching out again next week, but that's a story for another time. The views and opinions expressed on the meaty part of the curve are exclusively the thoughts and opinions of the hosts and or guests and do not necessarily reflect those of Central Michigan University. So, even though it's not the end of the semester,
it's getting close.
I congratulated my own students this past week on making it 2/3 of the way, because what I know of that suggests that they'll probably make it all the way if they made it this far.
I mean, seriously though, it is November 5th.
It is.
Where
it only feels like June 5th. Yeah.
Where have the last 2 months gone? I really don't know. And you think about it, we've got 2 weeks and then Thanksgiving.
I took that whole week off. I took the week of Thanksgiving off, and then I come back for 2 more weeks, and then I'm taking 3 more weeks.
So the end is near.
I don't think anything could take the smile off my face at that thought. I love what I do, but I really love recharging and getting to think about the new year ahead. So you sold me. So the semester's end is rapidly approaching. So we're talking today about ideas to bring about a positive end, to bring closure effectively in a technology supplemented or driven environment, right?
Now, we don't want anybody to think that the semester ends today
or
this week or, you know.
It would never end on a Thursday. That's
this is true.
Yeah.
But just to be clear for some folks, but hopefully they can take what we share today and implement it as the semester ends. That's our whole point of doing it today.
And in my Fall 2 course that started just this past Monday, I think, or the Monday before this past.
Almost 2 weeks.
We're only in week 2, so we've got 6 weeks to go.
Yeah.
Let's just everybody overlook that I forgot exactly when it started. I'm in touch. But what we're trying to avoid are conclusions like this one. I shared this visual with my students on Monday evening because I thought it was hilarious. I think I may have given them some ideas, but for the sake of the recording, what we have is a response to a student evaluation of instruction, an EOC, SOS, what have you. In the space below, please write any overall comments about this course or instructor not covered above. And the student has written, if I had 1 hour to live, I'd spend it in this class because it feels like an eternity. My students really enjoy it, but as I said, I'm worried that I've given them
We definitely don't want anybody to feel this way come the end of the semester.
And so we're hoping for some good inputs today from the audience on things that we each do to bring good, positive closure. I have one thing that I'm willing and ready and able to share if you want to go to that.
Yes, please.
Kendra, do you want me to go to the slide or just talk through it? Let me just talk about it. I don't think the underlying concept will be foreign to our audience at all. Most of us have probably heard of KWL or KWHL charts
I'll admit I didn't know until you said it the other day.
But once I told you what it was, I think you have sort of heard of it. And what we're talking about is something that actually spans from the beginning to the end of this particular course. And as a first week activity, the students are asked to share what they think they already know about the subject matter at hand. After they've reviewed the syllabus, they've got their book in hand. I ask them, what do you know? That's the K. Then they're asked to explore what they want to know, the W. The H is the part that I don't always see as a component. But given that the course is a graduate course and I want the students thinking about their own methods and their own techniques and approach to learning, I asked them about how they plan to learn the things they identified in the W. The L is what I use as part of the overall course wrap-up. And in fairness to the developer of the course that I teach, this was already built into the class, and it really is one of my favorite elements of the master course for this particular class. But I have tweaked it a little bit. The first thing I did, the students didn't get any points for it until the end, as I recall. And so now I give them about half and about the other half for the whole chart. For KWH, they get 40 points.
Okay.
for the L in week 8 at the end of the course, they get the other 60.
Okay.
The other tweak that I made, in addition to asking them what they've learned, and I want to go back and unpack why I've added this other part, but I also asked them what advice they would have for future groups of EDU 590 students. And where that has come from, I love the EOC and of course survey that we benefit from here in Global Campus. And the problem though is that the feedback I get from it, the student comments, I get after my next course begins.
True.
Typically,
Yep.
if they're running back to back.
Yeah, sure.
And so this was a way for me to get some of those insights a little sooner, because I package that up and use it as part of my introductory communications with the next incoming group. But anyway, with the L, students, they typically use their original chart, so they resubmit what they turned in 7 weeks earlier with a lot of things reflected on, the things that they did get to, things that they didn't get to, but usually what surfaces is a lot of unexpected learning, things that they didn't put in the W and didn't address a how in the H that have come as a result of taking part, being part of the course for 8 weeks. And it really has proven a very simple exercise. Most of them are very familiar with the technique because they're K-12 instructors and they're using those chart-based advanced organizers, graphical organizers with their own students. But it definitely puts a different spin on things and gives them a chance to really look at what they've achieved.
What has the student feedback been on that? On that
exercise?
Yeah.
They seem to like it. Two things seem to be happening. I think some of them sort of test me to see if I'm actually reading it because they'll mention me or ask a question of me specifically. Or I get a fair amount of shout outs in the L portion, some accolades, what have you. So the feedback's been really positive. Many of them are surprised about the learning that occurred around what I would call, I guess, sub-outcomes, or, the course has its learning outcomes, but in order to achieve those, most of the students get an incredible amount of comfort with Google tools, Google Docs, Google Slides, Google Drive. They don't expect that going in. And most of them think that they have a good understanding of Google tools, and so that comes up a lot. They usually reflect back on their favorite projects. It's a very project-driven course. They produce 8, 9 different things that they can take back to their own settings by the end. And so I usually see quite a bit of conversation about what worked. There occasionally are some critiques, especially if they've been part of a team that experienced some hurdles. I've tried, and we've talked about this in other weeks, the challenges to making team and collaborative work online.
Yeah, we have.
The issues are few and far between, but they still pop up. But the feedback's been really good, and all of it occurs digitally because this is an online course, and they're able then to submit it by sending me a link through Blackboard, or some of them upload a PDF or a Word document. But I could see this being done pretty easily on paper, with one caveat. By letting people do this digitally, I think I get a great deal more because they're typing their input and their thoughts.
Yep.
And I can usually see between for those that turn it in Word, for example, I can see how much editing time they had on the original and how much their second round of work adds to it. And people put in some time on this. They're really, for it being worth 60 points, which is not nothing, it's about 6% of their total grade in the course. But the effort and the amount of consideration and thought that most of these tend to show, it's a little disproportionate relative to the point value. So,
but I like how you're carrying it through the course, that the emphasis isn't on just the end of the course. You're giving them some value up front. You're kind of carrying it through, kind of making them think about it as the course goes on, and then carrying it down to the end. So, well,
we talked about, I think it's important that we say in no uncertain terms that it's not enough to just end a course if the course hasn't been going well, then your ability to end it on a really positive, successful note could be compromised. So I do like that the way we bring closure to the course is something that's been part of it from the very beginning.
Right.
I think too, they build out a wiki, and that's something that comes up in the L portion, because I think a lot of us have a list of bookmarks or emails we've been saving with links to things that we're going to look at. A big part of this course experience for them is finding and sharing things with each other and using some of the class time to explore, to visit those tools. And so I usually let them know that I'll leave the course open for a couple, 2-3 weeks following, so that they can go back still and make sure that they extract what they want. Other things I do for closure, always send probably more emails, not probably, I definitely send more emails during that last week than normal weeks, so that they're clear on a number of things. And thinking in terms of online course conclusions especially, all term long I give them part of the weekend. All the work's due Friday night, but I give them 24-hour penalty-free buffer into Saturday night. And some students take advantage, some don't, but that last week, it's probably not that I can't as much as I choose not to. The course officially ends at 5 p.m. on that Friday.
Sure.
I give them until 11:59 p.m. that Friday night to submit the last of the work, because as you know, my grades are due Wednesday, five days later in those cases. So, and
I think that's one of the things I see the most in reviewing end of course surveys is, I don't want to say the most, but I see it quite a bit. Well, we've turned everything in on Sundays all semester long. Why do we have to do it on Friday? And I think it's important to communicate those differences.
Well, I start telling them about that particular difference at the beginning of the week before the last week, just so that they're not planning to depend on it. And in that way, a student who was traveling and thought she'd have Saturday was able to connect with me, and I said, look, if it's Saturday morning and you can email the thing to me then I'll take it. Turns out she went into labor anyway, and we're still trying to figure out. We're still trying to figure that all out. But
that's a good excuse, I would say.
I'd call it an extenuating circumstance. Definitely act of God and all that sort of stuff. So there's nothing high tech here, but the technology is definitely underlying everything I'm able to do closure wise. Thinking along the same themes of things that thread all the way through. I know at least one person with us in the audience today creates a spreadsheet where she's entering in certain characteristics and things about her students up front. My final notes to the class are always congratulatory. Now, I don't always get to congratulate someone on the arrival of a son or daughter, like I did this semester, but I always have something to congratulate them on and wish them well. By then I know where they're working, who they're teaching, what they're doing. And I make specific mentions of those kinds of things and try to send them off on a really upbeat note. My course is the first one for a lot of people that are in it, right? And they're cohorts, and it's really so I can avoid this visual situation, right? You come to me at the end of the semester and say you need an A. Yes. Without a time machine, that can get kind of tricky.
Well, and
Todd says I'm soft.
Yeah, well, we won't comment on that time. But it's so true, and this is the other thing I hear a lot of is, I got an A- in this class, and I have an A, all along.
I'm a 4-point student.
I'm a 4-point student. But it's setting those expectations. It's clearly communicating with them, particularly when there is a change in something they might have been doing all term long. But I like when we talked about getting ready for this session, you were talking about in your final communication, you're kind of setting that tone for the next class. I'm done teaching you here, but I'm wishing you well, and I hope you experience thus or so.
And I invite them to reach back out to me if they need me for anything, if they think I can ever be of help. I'm actually still in touch with a couple students from the span of 3-4 years now. In this particular course, I see students all the time from courses at MMCC. But we talked about something else too, the idea of how much we touched on ERC, Global Campus's end of course survey tool, and I think we should come back to that for a couple minutes because for a while I would, and I'm not doing it anymore, and I don't have a reason why I'm not, but I thought we should talk a little bit about, do we remind our students that they'll be getting the EOC communication? Do we encourage them to fill it out?
And
What's appropriate?
Here's something I want to share with you. I strongly encourage instructors, anytime I talk to them, to encourage their students to complete it for various reasons. One is they get the emails. If they're not checking their CMESH email account on a regular basis, they may not get the emails. Or if they're having it forward to a Gmail account or Hotmail or something like that, sometimes those get filtered out, you know, those kinds of things. Earlier this week, we had a course that it was a fluke in the system. The EOC never went out. Oh. And so a student was checking because they didn't get a request, and that's when we found the problem. But I think it's important to remind students, not only because it provides valuable information back to the instructor, but back to the university, particularly when we see things, if we're seeing, we get a lot of comments like, this final exam had a lot of errors in it. You know, that may not necessarily be the teaching instructor's issue, although we hope, we've talked about this before, encourage them to fix those issues, but it's something we can then gather and share with the appropriate people. Hey, this needs to be looked at. So it does help everyone. Somebody not sharing, I hope there's a good reason they're not sharing.
Well, and
they might be a little nervous.
I'm thinking about it now, but when I stopped reminding people to do the survey, it was the same term I started asking a little caveat on the KWHL chart. And what I've noticed in the term since is the response rate doesn't seem to have been impacted. And we didn't talk about these themes ahead of time. So if I'm putting you on the spot and you're not sure, that's fine. But I'm curious about two things now based on what you've said. What's the typical response rate to the online EOC ballpark? We might have somebody in our audience that can jump on those too.
Yeah, she can get that really quick.
But the other thing I'm wondering about is what was the deal with this one course? Was there something unique about it?
It was the way. Make a very long story short. The site code was missing.
So there was no location for the course.
Of course, it didn't. The system kind of just
didn't know what to do.
As our techie likes to say, coughed up a fur ball and didn't know what to do. So
that's a highly technical.
See, I knew she'd be right on.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. And that was my response rate, and it's been pretty steady whether I remind or whether I don't remind. So when I did take the opportunity to remind, I usually would say how important their feedback through that mechanism was to me, and I would generally point out things they had experienced that term that represented changes, or maybe not even full-on change, but refinement based on their predecessors' input. And I think that's appreciated by students.
Well, and one of the things, here's another example. I had an instructor contact me earlier today. She had just gotten her results back for, I'm sure it was a Fall 1 online course. And in the survey, the students did not indicate or did not think they had done a report of some sort, and there was a report in the course. So it was the way the assignment was worded, the students weren't comprehending the level of that, the work they had done for that. So she picked up on it and said, I just need to rename this assignment so it becomes very clear to them what they're doing.
The report. I actually have one in my course that's that way. They do a technology survey, and they fill in a form, but it mentions producing a report. And so some people get caught up on, do I need to do a separate document that summarizes a narrative form and so forth. We've got some good stuff coming in over the chat. Tammy does do reminders and asks as the Week 8 discussion board topic to share comments about the class. I think that's a great way to do it. The students, then they can see what one another are thinking relative to the course. Do you find, Tammy, that once that conversation gets going on Week 8, that they build on one another's sentiments about the class?
Well, she's typing. I want to throw in, we've talked about this as well, and I'm not sure which instructor did this, and they might be somebody that's on with us today. They asked their students, what can I do more of? What should I do less of? and what do we need to stop doing in this course.
Which is a nice simple prompt. And actually, that the first time I heard about that was from John Zappala.
Oh,
I don't know if it was his own method or one he had adapted, but I've used that many times too, and I think it gives students at least a jumping off point, a frame that they can start to fill in. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure they respond. I think people want an opportunity to offer their input. I really do. And
they really
when they know that they're being heard and that the feedback is acted upon, that's crucial.
I don't want us to take us in a whole direction of EOCs.
No,
but I do want to throw this out here that we do review those on a regular basis, and any student that asks you, well, why do I have to do this? It's just a waste of my time. Or if they don't take the opportunity to do it or do it thoughtfully, we do review those, and the instructors get that feedback. We hope the instructors are reviewing it and taking it to heart,
Sure. Well, in synthesizing the last couple things in the chat, Todd's pointing out the importance of doing this at other places too, in the middle, other points, and Stephanie's indicated that's a stoplight approach that we were describing. That makes sense. But I think combining that with Todd's thought, if you get some things in the red zone from a significant number of students, you can act on it more immediately to impact the current group's experience, and that's certainly valuable too. Let's hear more from others with us today. The things we do toward the end of the semester. What are we doing to end on a high note, to create good closure, to avoid falling into a procrastination trap, possibly?
How do you keep your students going? How do you keep them engaged right up to the bitter end? And particularly this time of year, I think it might be more difficult for folks.
The first thing I do is not refer to it as the bitter end.
But I mean, this is really truly a busy time of year for everyone, students, instructors, everybody.
It is.
And how do you keep that going and keep them engaged, and so that they don't fall into this procrastination trap?
Right, and as Tammy's saying, so that it's about learning and growth. We really can't change the past, but we owe it to everyone involved to keep impacting the future.
Yep.
One of the things along these lines, I let the students know when a week will be a little heavier or a little lighter. And it's another thing that's fortunate about the structure of the course I was given, essentially, is that the final week is just a little bit lighter. They don't have to contribute to the wiki anymore. It's meant for them to gather and reflect and conclude. They do still produce a collaborative deliverable in the form of working with their team on that survey project, but they know going in that they're going to get this sort of gradual slide to the end. Versus ramped up intensity. And I'm not suggesting one way is better than the other by any means, but I think the students, they feel that more relaxed conclusion.
It's a perception, right. And I think there's also that perception when everything potentially gets crammed in at the end, that what's done at the end is more valuable, when in reality you want every piece of the course to be valuable.
Well, and that's why I'm always glad when someone reflects on some of the earliest things we've done in the term in their L portion, because then I at least know they've kept awareness. They've maintained awareness of the scope of everything we've done. Todd's suggesting lots of reminders, lots of avenues for contact. I think what I pull out of that is there's no other week where it's more important to be accessible and responsive. It's always important, but nowhere is it more important than that final stretch of a course. Because anything that can go wrong for folks, that's when it's going to go wrong, when confusion can come up. Right, how inconvenient was that? But she sent me a picture and wanted to know if I needed a letter from the doctors, and I said, no, I just wanted a picture to show my wife. She loves babies, and we're not getting any more babies, so she loved seeing that picture.
Well, and as we were preparing for this, you made mention that you anticipate your time and availability as much as you're expecting the students to anticipate their time and availability. And I think that's important. I mean, as I said, this time of year it's going to get busy, and
Well, I've been known to trim other commitments when I can, just so that I'm ready for final grading, for the increase in questions. Todd's suggesting maybe distribute a little cash. Love it. Tammy used different tools throughout the course to keep people engaged. Due dates are the same each week. We've talked consistency in other episodes, how valuable that can be. And decreased motivation. Gee, she and I are in a course together right now. Motivation is the topic, so it's on my mind, at least in a way that it has not often been. During the last week, send out self-care techniques. Oh, I like that.
Ooh.
I might have to ask for those so that I can borrow them. Sleep, eat healthy, drink extra water. Oh, I'm not interested in that. Never mind. I suppose you could mix extra water with the scotch. It just means heavy on the ice, something like that. Now, that's good advice, and I think what students will take away is that you're compassionate, and by then, of course, they know that they're working with a compassionate educator.
Right.
So, Kendra, I mentioned earlier that you are ditching out on me next week for the second time in one season.
I know, and I feel really bad about it.
Have I missed a single episode?
No.
No. But see, you could have told me I had just now, and I probably would have believed you.
It's been a long time since you've missed an episode of anything.
Indeed. The format for next week, though, because Kendra won't be able to join us, this is going to be fun. We're going to have a special guest. We promised that this show is about having special guests.
And we've fulfilled that promise.
We have many times. Stephanie Bechtel will be joining me next week, and we are going to talk about, I don't know exactly how to encapsulate this, but the myth of the perfect instructor, right?
The man, the myth, the legend.
Right, or the woman, the myth, the legend.
The perfect instructor.
We'll be talking about ideals from end to end, really, right? Paperwork, administrative concerns, pedagogical, responsiveness, whatever Stephanie wants to discuss. It's going to be an interesting show, and I think it would be a good idea for anybody who's planning to join us to think about the best instructor that each of us has ever had, and what made them the best. What single thing, what laundry list of things. It probably wasn't the fact that they turned their contract in on time, but that matters.
But that
right?
matters. That kind of sets a little precedent.
It may have been that they got your final grade in faster than anybody, and you were able to, student could get tuition reimbursement or what have you.
But
Stephanie wants to touch on how awesome everyone is.
Yeah.
That's good. We'll have blue ribbons to pass out to everyone next week, too.
Well, and we all have that favorite person, and we all have that least favorite person.
Well, Todd's signing on as the heckler. I think he's shooting to maybe be the latter, the least favorite.
But I mean, and it's when you look at both sides of it that you really find that quote unquote perfect instructor. It's the good and the bad.
We're bound by so much, right? As an institution, we have to be concerned about certain kinds of things, and timely submission of materials and grades, contracts, syllabi, opening a course shell if it's an online class, responding to email, answering calls, turning around grades. And those things, the further we get into this discussion, the more it does take us right into the classroom, virtual or otherwise, and the culture in there. But I think we'll have a good conversation. You know what I heard, Stephanie? There's a chili cook-off here next week, and the trophy they normally give out was apparently broken by one of our colleagues. So nobody's sure what anybody's going to get, at least with respect to the chili cook-off.
Well, I appreciate you holding down the fort in my absence next week.
Oh, it'll be fun.
Yeah,
I think I don't know if Stephanie doesn't have as much experience taking care of me as you do. But I think we'll have a good time. And I want to say, in conclusion, thank you, everyone, for joining us. And more importantly than that, everyone, please remember to stay calm and aim for
the meaty part of the curve. Have a good day, everyone.